I mean, and some of the things that he says are so distorted and out of tune with reality, I had to call him on that.
Okay, I have a question. What if Dr. Fauci is not telling us the truth? Why should we have endless trust in a public health establishment that has failed us 6 ways from Sunday? As we've been talking about, the public health establishment has completely failed on every messaging level with regard to the vaccination. The reality is you didn't really have to message this thing very hard. You know how I know? Because everybody who's old got the vaccine. Because they saw that if they didn't get it, there was a good shot they were going to die. And so they were like, okay, I'm getting the vaccine. This is a really easy sell. Right? People take a look at the risk factors and then they determine for themselves what is going on. But the Biden administration, because they wanted us to be all done by now and they really don't care about whether individual human beings choose one way or the other, they have decided that the real reason that there is vaccine hesitancy is, of course, because of right-wing misinformation and because social media refused to quash this right-wing misinformation. This is part of a broader media narrative that has been out there for a while, in which the media push social media to quash all dissenting information from a bunch of different sources, right? This is why NPR had an article earlier this week openly saying that Daily Wire should basically lose its traffic because Daily Wire is conservative. Not because we lie, not because we're anti-vax, not because of any of that, just because they don't like us. So normally you might expect the media, right, a First Amendment outfit, you might expect them to say to the Biden administration, guys, why is it your job to tell social media what can and cannot be distributed on social media? But, this is just excellent evidence that our media are just the Praetorian Guard for the Democratic Party. They now just mirror whatever is the narrative that the White House wishes to purvey. So if the White House says it's social media's fault, instead of the media going, wait, the social media is a platform. Why is the government trying to pressure platforms to remove information? Instead, the media is like, yeah, social media, why don't you remove misinformation? Here was NBC Nightly News, just doing the same thing that the White House would do, except indirectly.
How does social media influence people's relationship with facts?
So in our research, across different countries, including the United States, what we find is that when people receive most of their information about COVID-19 and vaccination from social media, they're more likely to be misinformed and they're less likely to get vaccinated. Versus when they get their information from official sources like the WHO or the CDC. So we actually can identify a clear link between getting your information from social media and having a greater amount of misconceptions about this issue, which in turn is linked to lower willingness to get vaccinated.
Don't you see that you should be getting all your information only from official sources? Does this sound a little bit fascistic to you? The only places you should be able to get information about COVID, maybe for anything, is the WHO and the CDC. Except for how the WHO and CDC have flipped 1,000 ways since the beginning of this pandemic. And if you'd listened to the WHO at the very beginning, you wouldn't have masked up, or the CDC, you wouldn't have masked up. And if you listened to the WHO up through about 5 minutes ago, the COVID lab leak theory was totally crazy. And if you listen to the WHO at the very beginning of this pandemic, it wasn't even an airborne virus, COVID. Except for that, it's really only trust the government is a hell of a take from the press. From the press, these people who are like, I'm going to hold power to account. We're going to force accountability from the powerful, make life uncomfortable for the comfortable. Except if they're of my political party, in which case I will say they ought to be the only informational source from which you derive information. That was NBC Nightly News, not the White House. Amazing. You see the same thing from a columnist named Will Aremus over at the Washington Post. He has a piece titled, Facebook and YouTube's Vaccine Misinformation Problem is Simpler Than It Seems. His analysis, in the end, is not that YouTube and Facebook ought to just ban information outright. Instead, he says they should basically just shadow ban it. Much better, much better. They should just change all of their algorithms so the only things you can see are the things that Joe Biden wants you to see, which, of course, is a restriction on free dissemination of information, obviously. That's what it is. Now, again, when we get to misinformation from the federal government, let me just point out at this point that Dr. Anthony Fauci is misleading you right now. Okay, so Dr. Anthony Fauci oversaw the NIAID, which is part of the NIH. The NIH did give grants to a place called EcoHealth Alliance. EcoHealth Alliance did give those grants to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Wuhan Institute of Virology performed what is, in effect, gain-of-function research on COVID-19, or at least it appears on COVID-19, right? We don't know if it was from the wet market. Now China's saying no. It is highly unlikely that this was produced anywhere but the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And since COVID-19 does not exist in bats, but now does exist in humans, it is highly likely that it was created through gain-of-function research. Now, that doesn't mean that the EcoHealth Alliance grant was specifically used to produce COVID-19. It does mean that the EcoHealth Alliance grant from the NIH was used for gain-of-function research in Wuhan. Now, the slippery way out of this little conundrum for Fauci and the NIH is to claim that technically they weren't funding gain-of-function research. Technically, the kind of research they were funding was just about making animal viruses transmissible in humans, not about making it more deadly in humans. That's a very technical distinction that really makes no difference for purposes of the conversation. Okay, the reality is that Dr. Fauci has been a wide and deep supporter of gain-of-function research for years and years and years because he likes the idea that gain-of-function research helps us fight future viruses. There's a case to be made for gain-of-function research, by the way. There is no case to be made that gain-of-function research being done under the authority of a totalitarian regime with no incentive for actual health structures ought to be funded by the United States. You want to say fund gain-of-function research at Harvard? Go for it, man. You want to say fund gain-of-function research in China at the Wuhan Institute of Virology? That's nuts. Okay, now Fauci was called on the carpet by Rand Paul for this. And Fauci basically said, we're not funding gain-of-function research. We had nothing to do with COVID-19. You don't know whether he had anything to do with COVID-19. I don't know whether he had anything to do with COVID-19. What is pretty clear is that you were not cutting off funding for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was performing exactly the kind of research that would have led to a lab leak, if indeed this was a lab leak. Nonetheless, here is Anthony Fauci slamming Rand Paul for quote-unquote slanderous commentary.
I don't take any great pleasure, Ari, in clashing with the senator. I have a great deal of respect for the institution of the Senate of the United States, but he was completely out of line. He totally distorted reality. And he made some inflammatory and I believe slanderous remarks about lying under oath, which is completely nonsense. I mean, and some of the things that he says are so distorted and out of tune with reality, I had to call him on that. I didn't enjoy it, but I had to do that because he was completely out of line, totally inappropriate.
Now, you may notice that Dr. Fauci never actually explains what Rand Paul said that was overtly false. He may not like the implications that Rand Paul is drawing. He may rely on this distinction between technical gain-of-function research and gain-of-function research on like a broad philosophical level. But nothing that Rand Paul said was actually wrong here. The NIH director does the same thing. Again, remember, these are your governmental sources. Do you trust them? Well, we're told these are the only people you should trust. Here's the NIH director defending Fauci.
I'm very concerned when I see probably the most highly respected infectious disease doctor on the planet being treated this way, having these accusations without any basis thrown at him, stirring up all kinds of nasty outreaches to him that require him now to have 24/7 security detail to protect him and his family. What has happened to us that somebody who's trying to help the public by telling them the truth is turned into this kind of demonized character for political purposes? It is unacceptable.
Okay, I have a question. What if Dr. Fauci is not telling us the truth? That's the question. Here's Rand Paul asking precisely that question yesterday.
Well, I think it's important to know that Dr. Fauci has a self-interest in obscuring any relationship or responsibility for anything done in the Wuhan lab. Without question, the evidence we presented in committee yesterday shows that the NIH was funding research in Wuhan. We showed the exact numerical series of numbers that goes with the grant number. So yes, they were funding the Wuhan lab. But you have to realize that Dr. Fauci's not disinterested. If this virus came from the lab and it becomes clear that he was funding dangerous research, moral culpability, responsibility attaches to him, and he does not want that.
Okay, but the bottom line is this. This really isn't about Fauci generally. It's about why should we have endless trust in a public health establishment that has failed us 6 ways from Sunday? It is private industry developing the vaccines that did not fail us. The public health experts failed us. They give us bad information at every turn. In some cases, they overtly lied to us. But the Biden administration idea is that only those people ought to be listened to, and we ought to just submit our own personal judgment to the tender mercies of these exact people. The answer for most Americans is no. And that means it's time to get back. We now the vaccines. It's time to get back to something approaching regular life. Who's got 2 thumbs and wants you to like and subscribe?